For one of the last steps of this op art exercise, I wanted to go into more advanced transformations and different tools that you can use to create more transformations that you can then use in order to achieve those visual optical effects and techniques that you are aiming towards based on whatever inspiration image you are using for the specific exercise. So here is what we've been working on so far. I have my layers over here. I have my background colors, my circles in one layer, all my lines in another layer. And right now I have, checking these lines, I have a couple groups of lines that are each at about 20 point stroke. So, and they also have a different opacity set to them. And I can check that over here underneath this little transparency tab. And I can see that I have set a 50% opacity on these. And I'm going to be doing a couple of effects to these, and then maybe changing the order of the layers just to give people more options and ideas for working with these optical effects. So first, I want to hide these circles. So by clicking this little eyeball icon, I'm changing the visibility. I'm not deleting that. I'm just making it invisible for a minute so we can focus on the lines. And I wanted to show people this really great new feature in Illustrator, and it's over here. It's with the warp tool. So under the defaults, I believe you start off with this width tool being the default icon in the toolbox. So in order to get to the warp tool, you have to hold down your cursor over that width tool and then select the warp tool. And I have this set pretty large right now. So, and I can see how this tool is going to affect the objects below and the lines below it by seeing that little outline there. So I'm actually going to double click on the tool in order to change this. So I'm going to actually change this to, I'm going to set this to the defaults, which is 100 pixels by 100 pixels. And this is just going to give me a slightly smaller tool to work with. So what the warp tool does is allows you to fine-tune some of the effects that you can achieve under this warp filter, under the effect menu, but it allows you to do it very specifically and essentially paint with the warp tool. So this is maybe my favorite part of this project. You can see how using this tool, I'm able to create these different effects very quickly, and I can automate this in a way that makes sense and is doing this in a uniform manner so that I can actually create some senses of depth here, and I'm able to do it very quickly. And it also is producing these effects and changing these objects, so changing these lines and actually changing the vertexes. So once I have used this tool, I can press my A to highlight the direct selection tool, which is this little white arrow, and then I can see how each of these lines has been actually physically changed. The geometry of the lines has been changed in terms of the vertexes. And then I can go through and using the changes that I made with the warp tool, I can further distort those vertexes. And so what the warp tool essentially just did here is it added vertexes and it created this warp effect in specific places where I painted it on these lines. So what you need, one thing I want to make sure people know is that it's best to have things grouped or selected before you use this. If you do not do that, then it will only apply the effect or the warp to the objects that it was originally resting on when you first clicked the tool. So I'm showing this again. Definitely play around with this tool. It's a lot of fun. If you hold down Option and then drag, you can change the size of the tool on the fly. And so that's pretty cool. And so there you can see how you can start to create these really drastic warps, and you can really fine tune them as well. And then let me highlight this. So maybe with this being on the top, it's not totally coming through as to what is possible here. But if I were to change the order of this, you can see how it can start to create a sense of depth below in the background. Maybe I would change the transparency of this a little bit more, so I'd make it 25%. So you can start to get these really interesting shifts and these different effects when you're working with these lines. With this tool on these lines. So another thing I want to show, let's say I have these, and these are all 1 point, and then let's make these closer together. So delete this. Or actually, here. So if you are working with this with lines that are closer together, then it will create more of that, that optical effect that you really start to get that sense of topography or some kind of depth that's happening because of this warp tool. So the other tools that are underneath this tool, they're pretty straightforward. They're a little bit more wild and they're a little bit harder to finesse, but you can definitely try to use them. I really don't want people to be driving their projects based on these tools and what you can do with them. Just know that they are here and they are definitely can help expedite things depending upon what you're seeing in your inspiration image. So I don't want you to be saying, okay, this is the optical effect is that it's pinched, or the optical effect is that it's bloated or that it's scalloped. Really look for these patterns, look for these effects within your inspiration images, and then try to fine-tune some of these tools to produce that same effect. Don't drive your images that you're going to be submitting based on what is just available and what's listed in these tools. So that's my final disclaimer, maybe, for that. I also want to show what's possible when you do apply this effect to shapes. So I'm going to hide these lines for a second. Or actually, I'm going to keep the lines because I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. So I'm keeping the lines visible, but I have them locked. If this was unlocked, it would apply the effect to anything, any object and shape, even if it's in different layers. So just keep that in mind. So I'm locking this, and then I'm going to select these circles and using the same, I'll use the pucker because that's what's over here. I'm going to do that. And so now when I click out of there, the shapes, the circles themselves are following a similar pucker to what I had done with the lines on top of it. So you start to see how you can really play with the lines and the shapes if you're applying the same type of warp to them and all that's possible with this. So let me hide these now and then just show what you can do with the warp tool. So I'm going to select all these circles. I'm going to change the size of this a little bit. So I'm holding down Shift to keep it more of a circle and less of a oval. And then you can just go through and create these different brush strokes of this warp throughout this canvas of these different shapes. So very, very quickly you're able to achieve this automated effect of this depth, and you're using this tool and manually using it in different areas of your canvas and of your field of shapes that you've created to really fine-tune the different patterns of depth and the different illusions and areas of illusion that you want. So in this situation, we have both lines and shapes that have effects applied to them, and then also we have these solids that have had manual effects applied to them. So I went through and changed the horizontal compression of each of these rows and also changed the opacity here. And then after that, I applied these different effects. So doing these things in relation to your inspiration image, that's really what's going to make for the most successful final image for these exercises. But also, these are pretty fun tools to experiment with. And so this is showing what happens when you don't have these shapes selected. It will only impact the shapes that were directly below the cursor when you first held down the tool on the canvas. So have fun with these, and don't forget to play with things like opacity, manual transformations, the order of these layers, the background color, maybe changing up the background color, and really look at your inspiration image and all the different strategies that Bridget Riley used and had to manually implement before digital tools were created in order to develop these really impressive optical illusion and op art paintings. So once you're finished with this, this is the last step. Be sure to save it, and then in the next tutorial I'll be showing just how to export as a JPEG in order to submit